Hello, everybody. My name is Kelsey Prihota. I am the Great Lakes Transportation Extension Educator with Minnesota Sea Grant. I'm also the Regional Coordinator for the Hazardous Material Transport Outreach Network, and this is the final presentation of our 2024 Summer Webinar Series. My co-host today is Aude Loche. Aude is a Water Resources Extension Specialist with Lake Champlain Sea Grant. A little bit about us. The Hazardous Material Transport Outreach Network, or HazMaTON, is a binational collaborative of specialists from the Great Lakes, Lake Champlain, Hudson River, and St. Lawrence River regions, focused on reducing risks associated with multiple modes of oil and other hazardous materials transportation. And today's webinar is going to provide us with some updates from the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise, which has a mission of operationalizing innovative ideas that improve freshwater and icy water oil spill response. And Commander Christopher Kit Pace. Commander Kit Pace is the commanding officer of U.S. Coast Guard's Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. And Commander Pace most recently served as the U.S. Coast Guard's Marine Safety Unit Savannah's Chief of Response, where he directed all ports, waterways, and coastal security response missions for 2 economic and military strategic ports. The capsizing of the Golden Ray, which is the largest maritime salvage incident in U.S. history, was a notable response overseen by Commander Pace while in Savannah. And Commander Pace holds a Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communications, a Master of Science in Environmental Policy, and a Master of Arts in Global Affairs. And this is the second year in a row that we've been lucky enough to have updates from the Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. So thank you so much, Kit, for being here. Second year in a row, and we look forward to your presentation today. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Happy to be here. Let me make sure all of my IT is working. Everyone can hear me, and you're looking at an introductory slide deck?
Yes, I can hear you. Your screen looks great. Thank you.
First success of the day. All right. Hopefully we can roll with this. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you also for your patience. If you're unaware, we're about a week later than normal. I needed to reschedule based on some travel. I'm sure I will hear no end of that from the presenter that you might have seen last month who presented from the Bering Sea. I was unable to present from an airport lounge, even though our scientific support coordinator was out in the middle of the ocean. Readiness, that ONR group. Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise, as Kelsey noted, currently the commanding officer of the Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise. I'll talk a little bit about the unit, a little bit about how we're approaching our very unique mandate, some updates, and I'll try to continuously tie in what an interaction with you all looks like in terms of advancing oil spill response preparedness in the Great Lakes region. Happy to take questions as I'm talking, so feel free to weigh in at any point in the chat, or if there's a raise hand function, any of those are acceptable. And I'm trying to advance my slide. It doesn't look like that happening. Perfect. Does everyone see a new slide, Great Lakes Center of Expertise mandate?
Yes, you've okay. Just advanced. So second win of the day.
Yeah, so my final tech check. So our mandate is unique. I'm not going to talk a lot about the history. I'm assuming a portion of the audience is generally familiar with the Center of Expertise. If questions persist, feel free to reach out. But generally speaking, pretty new. And what we've been tasked with is assessing, one, the current state of knowledge for Great Lakes oil spill research. The basis for any action is to identify current gaps. And then a large portion of what we do and what you all might be most familiar with is our research, development, testing, and evaluation which I will talk a lot about, but there are other initiatives that have really gained steam since any updates have been presented. And those really gravitate around education. I'll talk about what the current initiatives look like and how you all can stay tuned for opportunities to receive training administered by the Center of Expertise. And then the last bullet here is to standardize oil spill response. Critical for all of us to have a common understanding of success as it pertains to oil spill response preparedness. This is particularly unique for the Great Lakes Center of Expertise because we approach this mission really as a collaborative between academia and industry, where a lot of times from a regulatory perspective, we're either simply assessing the state of industry's ability to respond to oil spills. In this case, we're really looking at industry as the lead entity that would be, conducting the response to give industry the tools and maybe advanced tactics necessary to operationalize innovative ideas, as Kelsey so eloquently stated. Our purpose summarized. I will note that we are a non-operational body with a legislative mandate to conduct this research. That kind of ties into what I was getting at with our close affiliation with industry specifically, but also academia. Those of you in industry probably have relationships with Coast Guard regulatory personnel that come and check plans and things of that nature, and we don't wear that same regulatory hat. So by non-operational, we are here to advance technologies and tactics without the regulatory oversight. So hopefully that will enable some more open and honest conversations about what we as a community view as gaps or ways forward. 2 locations in Michigan. So both offices in Michigan, one co-located with the University of Lake Superior State. Again, just leveraging academia. Also a good jumping off point for our partners and Canada's multi-partner research initiative. I'll talk a little bit about those collaborations. And then the tie-in with our federal partners here in the Great Lakes region, our second office in Ann Arbor, where I sit today, with NOAA. Summary slide of what we've been up to generally in the last year. So since the last update, our focus has been fourfold. Regional partnerships that kind of goes in 2 different directions. The state of the science knowledge is key to understanding gaps in the way forward, but also trying to bring new people into oil spill research. So we've done a lot of work working with regional universities to talk to folks about what it might look like in terms of operational implications of the type of oil spill research that they might be interested in. And I'll get into a little bit more depth there. The really tactile thing that we've been doing is trying to make tools, right? So whenever we think about oil spill response, folks and waders and buckets and decon is what we think of. A couple of pictures here are detailing some of the tools that we're looking at, things that we'd like to put in people's hands. Up top is a device. It looks like a retrofitted magnetometer that you'd see somebody doing. A beach sweep looking for rings and coins, and that's basically what it is. In this case, it's retrofitted by the Army Corps of Engineers to detect oil. There's been some success with this in sediment, but this particular tool is meant to detect oil under ice. So a current gap that they realized needed to be addressed. So some of the current research initiatives, UAS image there, trying to standardize the way we approach aerial imagery for prosecution of oil spill response. And then that other image in the tool section is a dog. Another tool that might be utilized to detect oil underwater that is sunken or oil under ice. Personnel and training, I'll talk a little bit more about, specifically as it pertains to our regional partners and community partners, those in the area committees throughout the Great Lakes region. A couple of things noted here, though, are a little bit outside of what I'm going to talk about in terms of our incident command system training that'll be forthcoming. And that's some internships that we've started, really trying to tie together the Coast Guard Academy's cadet program along with oil spill research in the region. And it's allowed us to kind of branch out. I don't think in this slide deck I'll have an opportunity to talk again about the research regarding microbial degradation of oil with indigenous microbes in the Great Lakes. More of a Canadian multi-partner research initiative line of focus, as it does relate more to restoration than the Coast Guard typically dives into. But these internships have really allowed us to go beyond our typical statutory limitations. So that's been a really positive thing. And then we have the beautiful Coast Guard cutter Mackinac there, and that personnel training aspect is just bringing some of our larger assets out into the field to operationally test recovery equipment that is not used as frequently, fortunately, in the Great Lakes, because the scale of those spills is infrequent. And the last box there, infrastructure, research infrastructure, really ties in, I'd say, to all the things that I've talked about so far. So in terms of regional partnerships to allow for specific oil spill research to be conducted in the regions, is incredibly important to get personnel into the pipeline training of thinking about oil spills from an academic perspective, and the refinement of our tools as well. The imagery specifically that you're looking at here is some stuff that's being built at Lake Superior State University, a wave tank that will allow for the testing of sensors, oil and freshwater drawn directly from the St. Mary's River. And it'll be mobile, not in the sense that we'll haul around the region, but to be able to take it in and out of shelter so that we can have natural ice formation for purposes of testing and photo oxidation and such in the natural environment. So really excited about those initiatives, and what I'll talk about from here on out will really to each of these things. Oh, before that, our celebration slide. We've been up to a lot. It's like I mentioned, short-lived the unit, a couple of years that we've been here. We've engaged 26 research partners. Really excited to talk about some of those research initiatives a little bit later. We also just reviewed our fiscal year 25 slate of projects and made those selections. As everyone knows, the U.S. government funding is typically a little bit delayed. So October is when we expect to be funded and begin our contracting. That's when we'll notify everyone. So those of you who are on the line who might have submitted a proposal, those decisions will be forthcoming. And for those of you on the line who participated in the evaluation process, a great thanks to you for that. We're really excited that that process is now been refined and tested over the course of a couple of years, and we're excited to share with you what was selected for FY25. In addition to the research projects, a lot of what is going on out of the Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise directly relates to support to the operational commander in the Great Lakes region. That is Coast Guard District 9 out of Cleveland, Ohio, and mostly that to date has involved supplying them with off-the-shelf technologies that will allow them to better their mission, as they've always stood ready to, prepare and respond for oil spills in the region, giving them additional tools that wouldn't have otherwise been available through normal budgetary processes. A couple other boxes here talking about engagement with, folks throughout the United States as well as the other countries who've focused on freshwater research specifically a little bit more than we have as a U.S. Coast Guard. A couple of notes about training and community engagement. We take very seriously the idea that the best ideas are going to come from outside this unit, hence the public call for proposals, and hence my continuous request for your input both during this presentation and later. We'll give you some methods to get in touch with us once this is done. This will be new for a lot of folks. The Great Lakes Responder Workshop I got to get out of the habit of calling it training. Apparently, there are very specific definitions of training that we want to avoid falling into. But these workshops will look a lot like incident command system trainings that you may have seen in the past. For those of you that aren't familiar with ICS or incident command system, it's an all hazard response in the United States. The FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration, is the purveyor of most qualifications for this incident management structure that allows for individuals from varying agencies to come together quickly, varying agencies in the community. So the reason that this is important to us is the legislation that created us really identified a need for communities to understand this incident command structure a little bit more intuitively as this ICS training is, progressed throughout federal agencies and state agencies over the years. I think a lot of people are very familiar with the specific tasks required of individuals during a response. And it's potentially the case that we lost sight of oil spill response, or really any disaster response, being a community initiative. The Coast Guard has always, of course, supported that through area committees, but in this instance, the goal is to, leverage the potential for oil spills to kind of re-engage ICS as a community-based training, and maybe deviate from some of the more rigid type of curriculum that maybe some of you are familiar with if you've gone to, say, like an ICS 300 or an ICS 400, where it's very task specific. The target audience is, as noted here, community members as well as oil spill responders. And the idea being it would be a bit more of a organic exposure to the accumulation of personnel during a response scenario, conversation about how common objectives are established and what the communication process looks like. So a little bit less rigid ICS and a little bit more community response oriented. Those of you that participated in some of the surveys that informed what the curriculum looks like, thank you very much. All that's being processed right now, and the curriculum is being finalized, and our target convening date is summer of 2025. So looking forward to sharing the dates that those first convenings will happen. And the goal is to have at least 2 a year and vary throughout the Great Lakes region. So no matter where you are in the Great Lakes region, or if it would require travel, I encourage you to keep an ear out if you or folks you know might be interested. And the areas of focus are listed here on the right, from contingency plans to public affairs. Idea being, it's important for us to all understand what our roles are and how to best move forward in the event of an emergency, in this case, an oil spill. But it is also very important for us to understand what the public perception of both that incident and the response are. Right, moving right along. So talked a little bit about training. The thing that maybe most of you are familiar with are our research and development call for proposals. As I said, looking for the greatest possible exposure to ideas. So proposals are accepted from anyone, from the public, academia, industry, foreign government, non-governmental institutions, organizations. The call for proposals that we put out, there's a note here about how they're based on strategic plans. I'll just skip a slide and then maybe come back to the timeline. The call for proposals that you'll see in 26, it'll come out in March. Again, I'll get back to that timeline. But just for your awareness, if you're thinking that you might have an idea or you might want to suggest that someone put in for it, it'll look very much like it did in 25. So the themes were basically preparedness, response, alternative response measures, and then we included a theme 4 for basic science, which is something that we weren't really looking at in 24. I'll generally say that if you have an idea, or if you know of someone who has an idea, I would encourage you to reach out to us specifically. If it doesn't seem like your idea necessarily fits snugly within one of the themes that's broadcast for 26, because it's certainly the case that we might not have anticipated exactly what we need. Because again, the whole idea of this continuous evaluation of gaps in a region means we're learning new things. So it's not a rigid format in terms of what your ideas that you're submitting, but of course the application process does have some very specific requirements that you'll find publicized once that solicitation is out. The solicitation comes out in March of every year. So if you feel like this March is going to be a little bit too much of a press, just know that every subsequent year in March, a call for proposals will be released. Our very targeted initiatives that we would like, examples might be things like decanting or under ice detection will be noted. But again, any ideas are encouraged. The limitations, generally speaking, are a funding cap of $250,000. And we do look at projects on an annual cycle. So we do pick up projects that take multiple years. But just for your awareness, as you're kind of mentally structuring your proposal, it would need to be broken up into 1-year segments, and continuous funding would be based on past observed performance. So the call comes out in March. You'll have a couple of months before it closes in May. That's also an open opportunity to talk with us, though the line is always open if you have a desire to brainstorm or kind of bounce something off of us. And then after the call for proposal closes, we of course have an internal review that happens, selections are made, and that all is going on right now. So those of you that might have put in a proposal for FY25, you probably got some clarifications from us. This is kind of a second step in the process where we can take ideas that maybe we haven't had a lot of interaction with the proposer, but it is the case that we see certain elements that really strike us as being important. So this is kind of an iterative process, the clarifications, where we might tease out a single task or multiple tasks and see if we can't put together a project that is mutually beneficial. And then, as I mentioned at the top of the call, U.S. federal government funding cycle starts in October. And as soon as we can get money and establish contracts, that's when we'll make notifications to everyone that has been selected. And then work begins. And, as your period of performance starts, you have kind of a 12-month clock that starts. So at this point, I'll be able to talk a little bit about the FY24 projects that are ongoing. So that'll come a little bit later. But just kind of give you an idea of what a year in the life of the research and development program here at the Great Lakes Oil Center of Expertise looks like. A big part of that research and development program, again, is meant to bring ideas from places that we hadn't previously been sourcing them. So as some of you might know, the Coast Guard does have a research and development center that takes ideas from the field, from the Coast Guard members in the field, and develops those new taxing technologies. While beneficial, it's not necessarily the case that translates to industry. So what we adopted early on was what's referred to as a technology readiness level. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's pretty pervasively referenced throughout the U.S. federal government. I believe it was developed by NASA. Don't quote me on that, but it would make a lot of sense if it was developed by NASA, because in my opinion, there are some limitations to technology readiness levels. Generally speaking, what we're talking about on the left here, the scale 1 to 9, are just the ability for a technology to work in the field. So from basic research to lab testing to field deployment, what it doesn't take into consideration is what we've kind of coined as adoption complexity. And that takes many forms. One is price. So I understand that NASA can purchase technologies at any price to, employ on the moon or Mars. But when we're talking about a limited budget for oil spill response, it's incredibly important particularly as we're trying to motivate for-profit oil spill response organizations to adopt technologies that we're adapting or innovating. Cost matters. So that is a factor as we talk about ease of adoption. So another is technical proficiency. So technology readiness level, item might work in the field for, say, fluorometry, in this case, freshwater oil spill detection. But if it requires a team of scientists, or if it requires constant calibration or defouling, or any number of things that require a level of technical proficiency that limits the pool of individuals that can utilize the technology, it's less appealing to us. So we created this infographic to try to communicate to folks who are submitting ideas to us where they might sit in terms of desirability for us. And I'll give you an example of a project. I spoke about it a little bit earlier. It was the Army Corps of Engineers was retrofitting a piece of equipment that might detect oil under ice. And that is early stage research. It's never been approached in the way that the team is approaching it. So from a technology readiness level, it's quite low. I mean, this first bracket of 1, 2, 3. But from an ease of adoption standpoint, if and hopefully when it works, it's an incredibly easy thing to manufacture. It's an incredibly easy thing for anyone to pick up. So, someone newly hired to an oil spill response organization who goes out into the field could conceivably be able to pick up this piece of equipment that costs under $300, turn it on, and wait for it to beep as they're walking over ice, or employ it on some sort of uncrewed system that's driving over unstable ice, and just wait for it to beep. So inexpensive, low in terms of technical proficiency requirements. And really what the technology does is give us a better idea of where to poke a hole in the ice to see if there's oil there, as opposed to what we currently do, which is maybe a little more random or based on modeling exclusively. So happy to talk more about this. I don't see anything in the chat, but during the question and answer, if anyone wants to come back to this, happy to chat more or get your thoughts. Because again, this is fairly new, and how we're trying to kind of process the ideas that are coming to us in terms of evaluating their merit, worth, based on where they stand on the technology readiness level scale, and how they might be integrated into an industry-led response. This is an example of how we might communicate this to you. If you were to come to us with a proposal, mentally we might be going in that gradient chart of, how well developed is this technology, or where could this end up in terms of an operational implication. And generally speaking, those that we've engaged with have proposed deliverable categories that are either a product, a knowledge, or some sort of design. And this being an industry group, I'll follow the treasure trail of a product just to kind of talk through how we might get to what we view as a significant operational advancement based on an idea. Deliverable example of a product might be a prototype. So in the example that I was given, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're going to want to identify the target audience. So who's going to use that product? I've been using the same example of oil spill response organizations, so we'll roll with that. And a path to integration would be demonstrations, presentations. So ideally, a for-profit company would be selling these products to a willing and accepting oil spill response community. Another method is direct transfer to our operational commander or to coasties in the field. So the technology would be used more in an oversight role. In that example, I'll bump down to the bottom because I have been using the example of the Army Corps creating this product, in this case design. And the idea being the Army Corps, of course, wouldn't be manufacturing this electromagnetic interference detection device, but instead probably leasing the patent. So they have a rich history of doing that. So, if we follow along the bottom here, in this case, it's a design. And what we talked about with this PI was the creation of a blueprint or instruction for modifying a technology. Who might adopt that, and how do we get it to them? And in this case, again, the path to integration there on the right is either the publication and public sharing of knowledge or the leasing of a patent, which in this case is the instance. But also happy to go over this, but just give you an idea of kind of what the conversation looks like, both internal to the Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise when a proposal is being evaluated, and also how we reach back out to a proposal, someone who submitted a proposal, to help refine an idea so that it fits directly into an operational implication or a path to integration. Timeline, again, it's important. I won't dwell here, but again, March is when you will receive a notification if you go to our website and sign up to be on our distribution list. You'll receive a notification that on sam.gov there's a call for proposals, and then we host on our website all the details and examples of proposals that you might want to emulate. So I'll talk about some proposals that were accepted and we're currently working on. Do a time check. Perfect. So I'll be a little bit quick in talking about these, but happy to answer any questions when we get to the Q&A section. There is a QRC code at the bottom right if you want to use that. I think that takes you to sign up to our distribution list. We release quarterly the performance portfolio of all the ongoing projects. I'm going to talk about some of these, but in the same place you can sign up for updates regarding funding opportunities as well. I'm not going to talk about every project that we're working on. I grouped some into general categories just to kind of give you an idea of what's been selected in the past. I mentioned response tools as being handheld things or things that are employed out in the field like dogs. It is also the case that knowledge products are incredibly important to inform response. So just quickly going over these, starting at the top left, the Federal On-Scene Coordinator Representative. Oil and Ice Guide is one that is meant to inform Coast Guard federal on-scene coordinators in the event of an oil spill on ice, so that the knowledge base will be shared regarding updates, both scientific and technologies that can be utilized in that environment. We did contract with NOAA for the creation of this product, so it will be publicly available and beneficial really for anybody. So the target audience being the Coast Guard, but looking forward to sharing that end product. That project is in progress. Updating environmental sensitivity indices was incredibly important for informing oil spill response in the Great Lakes. That's completed, so anyone who is fluent in IRMA or accesses those databases will have access to the updated ESIs. And in the bottom two here, uncrewed aircraft systems are more framed for Coast Guard because we do have unique limitations regarding what we call quote unquote blue UAS. We are more restricted in our ability to use uncrewed systems based on technological restrictions. So a lot of what we've done to date doesn't really include or consider industry who can use systems that are cheaper off the shelf to advance their interests. But just for your awareness, something that we've been working on. Preparedness, another category. The Lake Erie Trajectory Analysis Planner is live, so you can go online and use this. Basically looking at modeling in a preparedness sense as opposed to a response sense. So directly under it, you see enhancing Great Lakes modeling. The projects look similar, but actually have functionally very different purposes. During a response, obviously it's important for us to detect, surveil, and track oil, and part of that involves modeling. And so during a response, the modeling that's going on is quite different than what we might use in preparation for response. So the Trajectory Analysis Planner is really meant for the ability to visualize spill events throughout the Great Lakes region. Right now, Lake Erie is the only lake that's been modeled, but it'll give us an idea based on historic currents where oil might go. So this might inform where response gear is located, like pre-positioned, things of that nature. But the goal is to inform discussions about potential spill scenarios. Also completed and publicly available is the oil spill response capabilities evaluation. That was a project that was contracted to RAND. We thought it'd be important for a third-party entity to conduct a gap analysis for oil spill response preparedness in the Great Lakes. The short version of this is through all regulatory requirements, the Great Lakes does stand ready to respond to oil spills. And then kind of the nuanced, the acknowledgement is we can always do better. There's a lot that we can gain in terms of our understanding and preparedness. But that's the one paragraph version of the 250-page report that you're welcome to look at if you just Google that. And then fate and transport of non-conventional oils. Definitely a topic of discussion. I think every time HazMaTON meets, it doesn't necessarily fall strictly within our mandate. Oil spill is both in our name and our legislation, but certainly important. And there's a lot of carryover between the research we're doing and those unconventional oils. I mentioned that we're getting a little bit more into the basic sciences. I won't go into too much depth. I feel like I've talked about most of these things already. Maybe not so much the weathering of non-conventional oils and freshwater systems, but simply put, the thought process here is when we understand weathering of both conventional and non-conventional oils, we can do a couple things better. One, understand the implications of an oil spill, so we can better we can strategically use limited resources. The other thing is we have a better understanding of modeling and how these products might persist in the environment, continue to float or sink, to inform our response protocols. I mentioned our infrastructure as well as the microbial degradation projects, and then the thermal capabilities is an interesting one. Just looking at different sensors' ability to inform where oil is in the environment. So a lot of work looking at both infrared, LiDAR. Really the inevitable goal is to see if we can develop a system that allows us to detect oil in low light or no light situations. I believe this is the last slide. Detection, of course, is important, particularly as we discuss oil under ice. And all of these projects that are highlighted really have an under ice focus, though many of them have more general applicability. Working with Michigan Tech Research Institute, the idea is fluorescent luminescence of oil is something that can be detected by some pretty basic camera components. And the goal is to really understand how those work and then employ them on uncrewed underwater systems, so that we would be able to potentially detect pockets of oil under ice. But once this illuminative property is understood, of course, there are a lot more implications than just under ice. And the same really is true of most of these oil detection canines. Again, happy to talk about it, but there's a long history of these canines being utilized in responses, detecting tar balls and sediment. So the idea of going the next step to see if they're able to detect oil underwater and then oil under frozen water is a natural progression. Experimental lakes area is highlighted here. Certainly my favorite presentation on HazMaTON to date was hearing about the research going on there. We very much look forward to this project kicking off and collaborating with them where these docks will be tested. I talked a lot about our electromagnetic interference detection system, so I won't go into any more detail there. And the last project listed here is looking at the ability to use acoustics to detect oil, particularly pockets of oil under ice. And this one's in kind of a basic evaluation. This is a testing of an off-the-shelf product, but in our view, a research project that's looking at the fundamental science of whether or not this is something that we want to look into further. And that's it for me. I will open it up to questions. This is the same QRC code if you'd like to join our mailing list, or if you want to type in the .mil, feel free to navigate to our website.
Thank you so much, Kit. It was perfect timing. So great job. We shut off your video while you were talking to improve the sound. So you're welcome to start your video again if you want.
Perfect. Oh, you might have to. I'm getting a notification.
Okay. So I'll do that. Oh, Kelsey, can you do that?
Yes. Yep. You should be
you.
good to go now, Kit.
Okay, well, maybe we can start the Q&A without your video, and hopefully it's going to show up at some point. Thank you for this very helpful presentation about what the center is doing. I think you've been busy over the past few months, so thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We have a few questions that we can get started with, and then if folks in the audience, yeah, we can see you. It's awesome. If folks in the audience want to add questions to the Q&A, feel free to do so. And I wanted to start with a question from Donna Roberts about what you presented early on in the presentation about how the center is has engaged with 4 different countries. So one we assume might be Canada, but what are the other countries that you've been engaging with, and in what kind of collaboration do you have with them?
So to date, pretty basic. The idea, so of course, Canada, I would say that is a rich collaboration. Again, the work that we're doing in parallel with the Multi-Partner Research Initiative. Actually, that group is at our Sault Ste. Marie office today, looking at some of the research that's being hosted at Lake Superior State University. Our other areas of focus are, I'm going to mispronounce the name, but Cidre in France. We're currently looking at a custom curriculum for us as oil spill responders for the freshwater implications that they judge to be relevant. And then Australia and Norway are 2 countries that we've seen a lot of research regarding, especially the use of uncrewed systems and also freshwater oil spill implications.
Okay, great. It's nice to see that you have this collaboration in international collaborations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's immature. I wish I could say more. It's certainly going to be our focus. And to be honest, when I came to this position, it was the thing that I was most excited about. And I was really surprised to find that we really need to understand regionally what's going on even before we start going outside US borders. It was really surprising to me to find that regionally within the Great Lakes, it's certainly the case that there is a lot of room for us to understand what's happening with both universities and industry partners, and to get a common understanding of how everyone is approaching the question of the implications of oil spills.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kit.
Yeah.
So Yolanda Ferguson had a question about the call for proposals, and she asked about do proposals only apply for your area or any location in the United States?
Oh, anywhere in the world. So, and I think the question is, if you are located in Texas, could you submit a proposal? The answer is yes, if that was the question. If the question was, can the research I'm doing be based on Texas or utilizing, say, infrastructure in Texas? The answer there is maybe. So as long as there is a clear advantage to our regional questions or response capabilities, there's not a requirement for you or your work to be done regionally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And let me know if that didn't answer the question.
Yeah, please, Yolanda, let us know in the chat if that answer your question. We have a question from Kelly Broom. I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly, so you can correct me if I don't. But I think the question is about for the kind of work that you fund. Is there opportunity to fund work looking at the impacts on benthic mats and algae? The impact
Yeah,
of that.
I think so. My ignorance of biology and general science will probably be apparent here, but I think the question that will inevitably be asked of a proposal is there a tie to the freshwater environment? And if the answer is yes, then it's all go. It'll just simply be based again on merit and compared to those proposals that were submitted in the same year. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you, Kate. So I have a question. As you know, HazMaTON, we serve as an outreach and education network for the Laurentian Great Lakes. And from your perspective, what is the most important information that needs to get to residents of the Great Lakes region to help improve their understanding of oil spill response?
Yeah, that is a good one. Because inevitably the risk of a spill is completely based on what we collectively as a voting public have acknowledged is a reasonable risk, right? So we use oil, so there's a risk of oil spills. There was a really interesting University of Michigan study that I was exposed to. Maybe I can find that and try to share it, but it was a risk analysis, and individuals were asked about their perceived risk of a particular transportation method in the Great Lakes. I won't name it to bias any thought process, but the individuals' responses were grouped, and it was the case that the general public's response regarding the risk of this certain transportation method was very different from the assessment of risk by industry professionals, right? So be it rail or pipeline or whatever. So those who are industry professionals or regulators said, hey, this is actually a pretty safe way of approaching this, where there was a public sentiment that it was incredibly dangerous. I think that might be the first place to start, because as an individual, I don't know that it's reasonable for us to, unless we're talking about activism, I don't think it's reasonable for us to put the onus of all oil spill response on any one individual shoulder, because what we're really talking about is industrial scale issues. And that being said, the first step in having an informed discussion about whether they're acceptable risks are actually understanding the risk. And I reference that study because it is the case that oftentimes emotion might lead to a perception of risk that either isn't consistent with reality, or if current processes were changed, it would provoke increased risks in other ways. So if we deviated from one form of transportation to go to another, it might have seemed like a good idea, but actually introduces more risk in the meantime. So from a public perspective, I would say awareness, and I forget the original part of the question. So was it, what can a citizen do, or what can we do as regulators or as industry to help include citizens in this discussion?
What are the things that they might need to know to understand the process of oil spill response? Is there anything that residents should know about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take another shot at answering that. And maybe I'll answer it in two different ways. Um, what they should understand about oil spill response, I would say, is similar to what they should understand about any all hazard response. And that is, it is a community initiative. It should generally be understood who has what role. And that is really the focus of the incident command system training that we'll be administering. Uh, Idea being, members of the public have very unique roles, and some of those, a mayor might be responsible for the public face of a response, or a non-governmental organization might be responsible for the voluntary mobilization of volunteers or observers. And to understand how those types of efforts are integrated into a response are better done beforehand rather than later. I will caveat that, though, because as a regulatory body, I say that's not what we do, but I still wear the suit and could be mobilized. That's our job, is to do response, and the citizenry should rest with relative comfort knowing that we do that and we know what we're doing, and it's not incumbent upon them to be responsible for it. I will say, though, that we have a very limited view in some ways. And that's why we really wanted to look at a public call for proposals, because something that the public can do is inform us maybe of the risks that they perceive that we are unaware of. So, and I think across communities in this regard, from, if you look at demography from like highly affluent areas to less affluent areas, or if you look at indigenous acknowledgement of the land and resources, those are all going to be very different. And the way that people approach that, the way someone who is a commercial fisherman approaches the conversation regarding what they perceive the risk is very different than say me. So I would say the public sharing what they view is at risk is incredibly important, and will potentially drive our research so that we can understand how we might mitigate that risk.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you. We have a couple of follow-up questions based on things we discussed earlier. So Kelly's question, I think she rephrased the question, are impacts of oil spills being studied on their impact on both planktonic and benthic harmful algae blooms? So I think that was the original question.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that I am well suited to answer, and I don't have any of my scientists backup to help me, but I don't think it directly gets at the question, but maybe this will help. When we start looking at maybe algal blooms, or specifically the impacts upon biodiversity generally in a response, it falls outside of what the Coast Guard typically does. So Coast Guard response ends basically, if you can imagine, when the physical removal of oil is done, right? So the what's clean is completed, and then another U.S. federal entity steps in when they start talking about, or when the initiative changes to restoration, and that's NOAA. So the Coast Guard historically has not engaged in restoration because it's not part of our authority or jurisdiction. The thing that we are doing is kind of blurring that line, because it's incredibly important from a scientific standpoint to understand the implication of, biological implications of spilled oil. And the way we kind of get around that, limitation in our authority is by making the argument that the proper utilization of limited resources depends on our understanding of the biological impacts. Mm-hmm. So the potential for studying that is there. I will say that it doesn't squarely fall into our mandate, but again, encourage anyone with ideas that you think might even be on the periphery of our mandate to let us kind of chew on them with you and decide whether or not it's something that we can move forward with.
Okay. And I think I will end here with a last question. Where do people go for more funding, for more information about funding opportunities?
Yeah, the website I'm not sharing anymore, but if you just Google Coast Guard Great Lakes Oil Spill Center of Expertise or use your search engine of choice, you'll be directed to a web page circa 1995. US government websites aren't the best, but it should be fairly easy to navigate. There will be a tab that notes funding opportunities, and everything that was relevant for 2025 is still up and will remain largely unchanged for 26. So you'll have a chance to look at the templates and those type of things. And on that website will also be an opportunity to sign up for a distribution list so that you'll have the latest and greatest on opportunities as they arrive in March of each year.
Okay. Thank you, Kit. And I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey now.
Thank you so much, Kit. This was great, super informative. Really nice to hear from you again this year. And thanks to all of our webinar participants. Remember, all you have to do is go to hazmaton.org/webinars, and you can find years worth of webinars from our past that are still quite relevant and informative. So